The death cult that is Canada. I want to do an expose on this because I want people to appreciate it. I want people to see the receipts in real time, and I want people to understand where this goes. And it's not an accident. It may or may not be an inevitability, but it certainly is, as far as I'm concerned, part of the design. Now, back in the day, Canada legalized medical assistance in dying. And they did it because the Supreme Court came out and said, we can't deny people the right to ethically and peacefully take their own lives. And we want to allow that to be something that people who are terminally ill can avail themselves of. After the Supreme Court came down with this ruling, it was 2016, 2017, give or take, there was a discussion as to whether or not they should also extend this privilege, this right, to the mentally ill. This was an unsolicited addition to the legislation that was being passed to codify the ruling from the Supreme Court. This is Law Librarians of Congress, legalization of medical assistance in dying in Canada. July 26, 2016, posted by Ruth Lavouche. Now, I know the history, and this is just one of the documents that will evidence the fact that I'm not pulling this out of my butt, and that this is the history of how it came to be. Federal legislation. On the federal level, legislation concerning medical assistance in dying was passed on June 17, 2016. After a very heated debate between the House of Commons and the Senate, Bill C-14, an act to amend the criminal code, because they had to make it not illegal. They had to ratify the Supreme Court decision into law by amending the criminal code to create exceptions for what would otherwise be manslaughter. I don't know. It would otherwise be criminal death. And so they had to amend the criminal code. An act to amend the criminal code and make related amendments to other acts, medical assistance in dying, received the royal assent and came into force. This new federal law amends the criminal code and establishes the conditions and procedure under which one may receive medical assistance in dying. The legislation authorizes and governs active euthanasia as well as physician-assisted suicide. However, it appears that the scope of this law is much narrower than the ruling of the Supreme Court in Carter versus Canada. Now, at the time, you will recall, there was the unilateral addition of, well, you don't want to deny this constitutional right as adjudicated by the Supreme Court to the mentally ill. And so we want to allow the mentally ill to also take their own lives. How you can have people who are mentally ill, which is a defect of mind that sometimes actually precludes or prevents people from entering into contracts or entering into valid contracts, how they can enter into a valid contract to take their own life, set that aside. It was added. There was some debate. There was some concern as to whether or not this would be abused, much like the Nazis abused of their mercy killings to kill the handicapped and the mentally ill and, the mentally challenged at first. I mean, they called it mercy killings because it was merciful. In Canada, they just call it medical assistance in dying because euthanasia has too much of an ugly connotation. Monitoring and follow-up. Regulations regarding the monitoring of physicians-assisted suicide in Canada has yet to be established. So they're going to set up a monitoring system. When it comes to allowing the mentally ill to kill themselves, in 5 years' time, the federal government will hold a parliamentary review of the newly adopted law in order to address the issues of mature minors, that's minors, young people, under the age of ability to consent to contract. They call them mature minors, not even emancipated minors. And maybe I'm just, being the lawyer here. Emancipation is a legal status. It's a legal fiction. You can emancipate a minor so that they can have full freedom under the law as an adult would. I'm not sure that they would allow them to drink alcohol underage, but they could contract, they could buy stuff, they could sign leases, et cetera, et cetera. They wouldn't need parental consent. They do this in the cases of kids that are actually sufficiently mature, coming from family situations where they can't rely on their parents. Emancipated minors is a little bit different than mature minors in my view, but this is actually what they did at the time. They're going to wait 5 years in order to address the issues of mature minors, patients suffering solely from mental illness, as well as advance directives, an act to amend the criminal code and to make related amendments to other acts, medical assistance in dying, yada, yada, yada. So understand, they actually put in a provision that would allow euthanasia for mature minors. It would allow state-sanctioned killing for mature minors and people suffering solely from mental illness. Not like a schizophrenic with pancreatic cancer. Not like someone who is clinically depressed, maybe because they have stage 4 lung cancer and they don't have much time left. Suffering solely from mental illness. What's a mental illness? Depression, schizophrenia, manic bipolar disease, obsessive compulsive disorder, ADHD. I don't know. What solely mental illness is going to qualify someone to have their life taken by the state in what would otherwise be basically state-sanctioned murder? So that's step one. Supreme Court legalizes it. The government of Canada legislates it into law and sunsets. In 5 years, we'll go back and see whether or not we want to let mature minors kill themselves and how we're going to implement that and how we're going to make sure it doesn't get abused. In the interim, that was 2016, right? This is an article I've brought up a few times, but let's memorialize it forever. This is from the CBC, state funded. So now you have the state that wants to kill citizens, mature minors, and people suffering solely from mental illness. But there's a 5-year pause, right? What do you have to do in that 5-year pause? You got to convince people that it's not only not a bad thing, but it's a good thing to kill citizens. Can't treat, cheaper to kill than to treat. So let's take our state-funded Pravda, funded to the tune of $1 billion a year. That's the CBC and the Radio-Canada, not to be distinguished with bailouts for print media, not to be confused with subsidies via direct subsidies, government advertising on other media. CBC is a crown corporation. And right now, in this 5-year period where they have this provision that's been set aside, now they have their government-sanctioned propaganda telling you that not only is it not a bad thing, it'll save you money. Medically assisted deaths could save millions in healthcare spending. Report. Across Canada, Journal calculates up to $136.8 million in savings. CBC News posted January 23rd, 2017. Put it in the timeline, people. Keep track of this. New research suggests medically assisted dying could result in substantial savings across Canada's healthcare system. May I just, state the obvious? No shit, Sherlock. What do you think is cheaper? Feeding someone or killing someone? Holy crap. New report shows that killing children prevents parents from having to pay for their existence for the next 10 years. It's amazing. New report says that after people are dead, there can no longer be a burden on society, and it'll save the government money if the government kills those people. Doctor-assisted death could reduce annual healthcare spending across the country by between 34 and 136 million, according to a report published by the Canadian Medical Association Journal on Monday. The savings exceedingly outweigh the estimated 1.5 to 14.8 million in direct costs associated with killing. Holy shit. You know what you could do, by the way? You could bring down that cost by using a bullet. Just like a straight bullet, it'll be, 85 cents? I don't know how much a bullet costs. $1. Bring it down. When we get to the numbers, we're going to get to the numbers in a second. 13,000 in 2022? Well, if you didn't do it ethically, if you did it really on the cheap side, $1. $13,000, forget 1.5 million. The takeaway is that there may be some upfront costs associated with offering medical assistance in dying, but there may be a reduction in spending elsewhere. There will be a reduction elsewhere in spending. You know what there else will be a reduction in? Humanity. Well, more murders means less people to feed. The research used numbers, so I don't even care. You got the point. End-of-life care has high cost in Canada. You're right. Humanity has a cost. By the way, this is in socialized healthcare. If it were the people paying for it, or if it were privatized, you wouldn't worry about the government having to bear these costs. And for people who couldn't get private care, maybe those are the ones who might look into government care. But yeah, end-of-life care has high costs in Canada. I should have actually added step 1 was socialized healthcare. And then that way they can make all of this argument make sense in the minds of murderous people who are very similar, maybe not in direction, but in distance, to actual Nazis. Canadians die in hospital more often than, say, our counterparts in America and Europe. We have lack of palliative care services, even though we are trying to improve that. And therefore, people end up spending their final days in the hospital. So let's kill them. It'll be cheaper. All right, that's the exhibit. It'll be cheaper. You got socialized healthcare. You get legalizing the state-sanctioned murder, euthanasia, MAIDs. You get the state-funded propaganda telling you that it'll be cheaper. And you want to see what happens to medical assistance in dying in Canada? This is the actual chart. And I'll preface this by saying I don't believe the numbers. I believe it's way more than what we're seeing here. But look at that graph. Where does it stop, by the way? Look at this. 2016, 1,018 people medically assisted to death. 2017, it nearly triples. 2018, well, you can't triple from 2,800, so it's only up by what? It nearly doubles. Now, you can't double from 4,493. You can't go to 8,000 right away. You got to wait a couple of years. Then it goes to 5,600. Then it goes to 7,600 in 2020. Then it goes to 10,000 in 2021. Then it goes to 13,000 in 2022. Then it goes to 15,000 in 2023. That's a parabolic curve, people. That's the proverbial hockey stick, eh? Who would have thunk? It gets cheaper. Look at this. You're killing 15,000 people a year. Imagine the savings. The only thing you need to do right now is turn them into food or, harvest their organs. Then you'll save on palliative care costs, or you'll save on costs, especially when you go to mentally ill and mature minors. Harvest their organs. Oh, what's that? Passing legislation at the exact same time that you're doing that? Avery's law makes organ tissue donation automatic in New Brunswick with some exceptions. What year is this from? 2023. Note the timeline that we're on, people. Yes, I'm crafting it this way, but these are the facts, and this is the timeline of those facts. New Brunswick, another province in Canada. Province becomes second jurisdiction in Canada after Nova Scotia to move to this model. The model of presumptive organ donation. Do you guys want to shit your pants? And I'm sorry to swear. Do you want to shit your pants? You want to puke? I'm going to show you the law out of New Brunswick. And you will not believe your flipping eyes. This is New Brunswick, Canada. Acts and Regulations. Human Organ and Tissue Donation Act, 2023. Human Organ and Tissue Donation Act. His Majesty, by and with the advice of the consent of the Legislative Assembly, New Brunswick, enacts as follows. This act may be cited as Avery's Law. Let's just go down to a section that you'll read it and you're going to say, well, it's not possible that I read what I think I just read, but it's there in the law. Section 17, pre-death approval by chief coroner. Well, sorry, did you just say that this is organ donation pre-death? So you mean alive? Pre-death approval. So you've been approved before you're dead by the chief coroner. Listen to this. The chief coroner may allow the removal of organs or tissue after the death of a person, notwithstanding that death has not yet occurred. Can you read that 5 fucking times? I apologize. Read that 5 times. The chief coroner may allow the removal of organs or tissue after the death of a person, notwithstanding that the death has not yet occurred. Now, I'll steelman an argument right here. And there are some people out there who are going to say that organs have to be harvested while the body is technically still alive. Brain dead. If the body and the heart has stopped, there's only so many hours you can have before things start to rot or become useless for the purposes of donation. And so by and large, the body is still alive in all of these cases. They're just codifying what is the reality of organ donation. That's as strong as it can get. That is garbage. The coroner may allow the removal of organs or tissue after the death. Here they're actually saying after the death because it's a concept of a person, notwithstanding that they're not yet dead yet, if, in the opinion of a physician, the death of the person is imminent by reason of an injury or disease. So you're not dead yet. They're reasonably certain you're going to die, so start harvesting them organs. This is the actual law as it's drafted, as it currently exists in reality. You don't have to be dead. They can start harvesting your organs while you're still alive or, pre-death, notwithstanding that you haven't died yet, if, in the opinion of a government employee, the death of the person is imminent by reason of injury or disease. This is murder for the purposes of harvesting the organs, in my humble view. Have there ever been cases where people's death was imminent, where they were brain dead, and they magically, miraculously came back to life, didn't die? Not anymore. We're just going to pause this video now for a real-time fact check because a Canadian lawyer by the name of Ian Runkle of the Bailey, he's got a great YouTube channel and Twitter account. Check him out. He said, Viva, you are reading this law wrong. In response to my tweet where I say, understand what you are reading here, read the words, then read them again. Ian Runkle says, it looks to me like you're misreading it. I read it as, quote, the chief coroner can approve the removal while the person is still alive, but the removal must take place only after they have died, end quote, which isn't really an issue. Quote, when this guy dies, you can look at the organs, end quote. And then going back to the law itself, it says the chief coroner may allow the removal of organs or tissue after the death of a person, notwithstanding that death has not yet occurred, if, in the opinion of a physician, the death of the person is imminent by reason of injury or disease. And so Ian says, look, all that's being allowed here is the allowance, the authorization for the removal of the organs after death, notwithstanding that death hasn't occurred yet, whereas I tend to read it as though they may allow for the removal of the organs even if death has not yet occurred, notwithstanding that death has not yet occurred. Now, I can sort of understand how Ian is reading it here, and suffice to say it's sufficiently ambiguous because even in the replies, people are sort of confused. I sent it to lawyer members of my family, and they initially read it the way I read it, but they can read it the way Ian reads it. I had one more thing to add as to why I think Ian's interpretation is wrong, and I write in response, I appreciate what you're saying, but I'm still really not certain. I will definitely correct myself if I am wrong. And I'm putting it to you, the internet, to let me know who you think's reading is right or wrong. But this is my other point. If your interpretation is correct, why would they need that provision if the organ donation is already presumptive under that very law? And there's a little more here. Also, unless it's just poorly drafted, I believe my interpretation is more in line with the actual plain wording of the provision, which is this: the chief coroner may allow for the removal of the organs, notwithstanding that death has not yet occurred, if, in the opinion of a physician, the death of the person is imminent by reason of injury or disease, as if to say, look, he's not dead yet, but I'm authorizing the removal of the organs because death is imminent. Now, a lot of people in the chat are saying, look, Viva, there's nothing revolutionary about this. You need to take the organs from the person while they are technically living, because if they're dead, the organs rot and they're no good for donation, which sort of confirms that my reading is the actual correct interpretation of that provision of law. And furthermore, the biggest point, that very law is the one that creates the presumption of organ donation, so you don't need the coroner to approve it in any event. It's presumptive. What you have here, upon my reading of the law, and if it's not the right reading, fix the damn drafting because it's sufficiently ambiguous that it's confusing everybody. I read this as the coroner authorizing the removal of the organs, notwithstanding that death has not yet occurred because death is deemed to be sufficiently imminent. That is how I read it. If I'm wrong, you let me know. And now we're back to the video. Oh yeah, and if it's not sufficiently obvious, yeah, I shaved. You see, I just changed that thing right down there. I shaved, it'll grow back. And now let's go back to Viva with a beard yesterday. And who do you think that this is going to impact the most? Homeless people? Oh, that's right. They were talking about doing it on homeless people too. Homeless people, people with no family in the hospital, people who are the most vulnerable in society. You remember that article from Canada where they were saying, Canadians support euthanizing the homeless if that's the cause? It wasn't like 5%. It wasn't 10%. It was 1/3 of Canadians fine with prescribing assisted suicide for the homeless. 2023, around the same time. This was done amazing. Around the same time. Say a homeless person got no family to advocate for them in the hospital, goes into the hospital, and look, it's a homeless person. Who's going to miss them? Let's start harvesting them organs. Not even dead yet. And you think it's hyperbolic, and you think I'm overreacting, rage baiting, as you say. This is where we're at right now. This happened this year, February 2nd, 2026. I covered this story, but I'm doing it again so we can have this insane, murderous timeline all together for the world to see, the world to understand, and the world to react to. And Canadians in particular. Mom outraged after mentally ill son, 26, was allowed to end his life with medical aid in dying. He was not of sound mind. Well, you found a murderous doctor that was willing to find a loophole. Keanu Vathian was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes as a child, later blind due to diabetic retinopathy. After struggling for years with mental health, the 26-year-old ended his life with medical assistance and dying. His mother, Margaret Marcia, is now calling his case a failure of I'll call his case murder, questioning how her son was approved amid mental illness. They found another doctor who agreed to make an exception. Mentally ill. We haven't yet gotten out of the sunset provision of that law. It's been extended to 2027. That didn't stop the Canadian government from killing someone who was mentally ill. Oh, and you go from euthanizing the mentally ill, and this is another one, euthanizing people who don't want to be euthanized. You know what that's called? That's called murder, people. This one's from Unilad, but it's a story that's now hopefully going to, say, go viral in the most cynical sense, expose to the world the insanity that's going on in Canada. Elderly woman allegedly euthanized, quote, against her will, end quote, after husband became, quote, burnout, end quote, caring for her. What did I say earlier? You get to the hospital and you don't have people advocating for you, you'll literally die in the hospital. You will literally be carved up in the hospital, your organs harvested because some bureaucrat says it'll be cheaper for the system. We can maybe make a little bit of, money on the side by harvesting these organs. It's a win-win. And there ain't nobody here to advocate for this person. What happens when the person who's supposed to advocate for you doesn't want to care for you for the rest of their lives? State-sanctioned murder is what happens. Medical assistance in dying is legal in Canada if strict requirements are met. Bullshit. An elderly woman who has allegedly changed her mind about assisted dying was euthanized, quote, against her will. The woman in her 80s had put in a request to use MAID services in Canada, which stands for medical assistance in dying. Mercy killing. The woman, who was referred to as Mrs. B, was suffering from complications after coronary bypass graft surgery. Following her, quote, physical and functional decline, she reportedly asked her family to investigate the possibility of her dying. We've covered stories where the government offers it unsolicited. Her spouse reached out to MAID, and the next day a practitioner assessed her for MAID eligibility. However, she reportedly said that she, quote, wanted to withdraw her request, citing personal and religious values and beliefs. Well, she was close enough. The report added she communicated that pursuing inpatient palliative hospice care and palliative sedation was more in keeping with her end-of-life goals. Well, it costs a little bit more money. So you said yes before, consent no longer required. You gave consent, and now you can't withdraw your consent. You're dead. At the time, her spouse, quote, was noted to be experiencing caregiver burnout, and a request was put in for hospice care, which was denied. Oh, kind of like that case of the Ontario woman who had multiple chemical sensitivity and was denied adequate living conditions because the government, couldn't provide it, so they killed her. They did. Multiple chemical sensitivity, aka severe allergies. A second MAID assessor was then consulted after her spouse's request, who objected to assist in dying. The report said this MAID practitioner expressed concerns regarding the necessity for urgency and shared belief for the need for more comprehensive evaluation, the seemingly drastic change in perspective of end-of-life goals, and the possibility of coercion or undue influence, i.e., due to caregiver burnout. The assessor requested to meet with Mrs. B the following day, but this request was denied, and a third assessor instead went to meet with her. Mrs. B was then euthanized after allegedly having told assessors she had changed her mind. Now, members of the Ontario MAID Death Review Committee have voiced worry that the decision was rushed based on the short timeline, with their concerns forming part of a report from the Office of the Chief Coroner. Their concerns included the impact of being denied hospice care, additional care options, caregiver burden, consistency of the MAID request, and divergent MAID practitioner perspectives. It added many members brought forward concerns of possible external coercion arising from the caregiver's experience of burnout and lack of access to palliative care, an inpatient or hospice setting. We're there, people. We're there at the timeline now where you don't need to be dead. They don't need your consent. And if you don't have someone who's vocally advocating for you, you go into a hospital, you're going to come out literally in someone else's body. That is the absolute state of Canada and euthanasia. And you see how it starts. Starts with benevolence. As if people tend to think that the Nazis thought they were doing anything wrong with their mercy killings. They know better. They can kill the people who are mentally ill. They can kill the people who are mentally challenged. They can kill the handicaps because, it's cheaper to kill them than it is to care for them. They're making society better. They're enhancing the gene pool. You think the Nazis thought they were doing anything wrong with their mercy killings? If you think that, you're bound to make the same mistakes again, because you don't understand that they too, I don't say presumably, they too thought what they were doing was for the greater good. And that is how the greater good becomes the oppressors of all. Ayn Rand said it, there's no greater minority than the individual. And if you do not support individual rights, you don't support minority rights. And you'll get the hell that you deserve under the pretext and guise of the greater good. That's what's going on in Canada. Share it. Make sure that you subscribe when you're watching this in clip format. Viva Friday. Make sure you watch daily, 3 o'clock on Rumble. Go to vivabarneslaw.locals.com.